I always thought buying an abandoned mountain house would be one of those quiet, soul-healing adventures you see on TV. You know, guy finds an old property, spends a few weekends fixing it up, drinks coffee on the porch while deer wander by. That was the dream. I had spent months scrolling through real estate listings, watching prices climb in the city, until one day I saw it: 3 acres of wooded land, a 2-story cabin, a small lake, and a breathtaking mountain view. The catch: the place had been abandoned for nearly a decade. The pictures looked rough: broken windows, vines crawling up the porch, roof half collapsed on one side. But the price was so low, it was practically begging me to take it. So I did. I bought it sight unseen from a bank auction. Signed the papers, paid the fees, and got a single rusty key in the mail. I remember holding it up to the light, feeling proud, like I'd just made the smartest move of my life. I didn't visit right away. Between work, city traffic, and winter storms, months passed before I could finally make the trip. By the time spring rolled around, I loaded up my truck with tools, supplies, and a head full of renovation plans. I even imagined turning it into a cozy vacation rental one day, something quiet, private, peaceful. The drive up was beautiful at first: rolling hills, winding roads, sunlight flickering through tall pine trees. But as I climbed higher, the road narrowed into gravel, then dirt, and then something that barely counted as a road at all. The GPS lost signal halfway up. My phone went dead not long after. It was getting late when I saw the mailbox, tilted, rusted, barely holding on, but what caught my attention was the name written on it. Someone had scratched out the old owner's name and written K. Fletcher in thick black marker. I frowned. That wasn't me. I kept driving, the tires crunching against the gravel, until I reached the clearing. That's when my excitement started to fade. The house wasn't just weathered, it looked lived in. The front porch had fresh chairs. The grass, which should have been knee-high, was neatly cut. A new-looking blue tarp was stretched across part of the roof. And then I saw something that froze me where I stood. Smoke, a thin, steady stream of smoke rising from the chimney. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. I remember whispering to myself, "No way." Maybe a ranger, I thought, or some caretaker I didn't know about. But the sale listing hadn't mentioned anything like that. I climbed out of the truck, and right away I smelled something warm in the air: wood smoke, and was that bacon? Now I was sure someone was inside. I walked up the old steps, every board creaking under my boots. My heart was pounding. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew this wasn't going to be a normal day. The door was half open. From inside I could hear faint music, some pop song on a small radio, and then a voice, a woman's voice humming along. I knocked once, twice. Then the door opened wider, and there she was. She looked like she'd stepped right out of a suburban neighborhood and accidentally got lost on a mountain. Mid-40s, blonde hair in a perfect bob, pastel sweater, holding a coffee mug like she owned the place. She stared at me like I was trespassing. "Can I help you?" she asked, calm as can be. I tried to play it cool. "Yeah, I think there's been a mistake. This is my property. I bought it from the county auction last fall." She blinked, took a sip of her coffee, and said, "No, this is our home." For a second I thought I misheard her. "I'm sorry, you're home." She nodded. "We've been here for years. You must have the wrong place." I stepped back and checked the number carved into the porch beam, same one on my papers. "No, this is definitely the right house," I said. "I've got the deed in my truck." She gave a polite, tight smile. "Well, you'll have to take that up with the association." "The what?" I said. "The Homeowners Association," she replied, as if that explained everything. I looked around, nothing but trees and hills for miles. "You're telling me there's an HOA up here?" "Oh yes," she said confidently. "We take property care very seriously." At that point, I didn't know whether to laugh or run. This was supposed to be an abandoned house on a private lot, not some neighborhood watch nightmare. I started to argue, but she held up a hand and said, "Look, you seem like a nice man, but we're not interested in selling or moving. My husband's inside. He won't like this kind of disruption." She turned and walked back in like I was some door-to-door salesman. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there on the porch, staring at the smoke curling out of the chimney, trying to process what just happened. Someone had moved into my abandoned house. Not just moved in, claimed it, decorated it, maintained it, and apparently, according to her, registered it with a mountain HOA that didn't even exist. I took a slow breath and muttered, "Okay, Karen, we'll play it your way." But deep down, I already knew, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something much worse. I didn't sleep much that night. I parked my truck a few miles down the road at a cheap roadside lodge, but my mind wouldn't shut off. The image of that woman standing in my doorway with a mug of coffee just kept replaying. Her tone, her confidence, it was like she truly believed she owned the place. The next morning, I drove back up there determined to clear things up. I figured maybe she was squatting, or maybe she had some claim from before the auction that hadn't been cleared up. Either way, I wasn't leaving without answers. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. The place was quiet, almost peaceful again. I stepped out, grabbed my folder of documents, and walked up to the porch. The chairs were still there, a half-empty glass of lemonade on the table beside them. I knocked again, no answer. So I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. The floorboards creaked as I walked through the living room, sunlight cutting through the dusty windows. Everything looked freshly cleaned. There were throw blankets on the couch, framed photos on the walls, even a stack of mail on the counter. I flipped through the envelopes. All of them were addressed to the Fletchers. No first names, no forwarding address, just this house, my house, as the return point. Then I heard the sound of a car door slam outside. I turned around and saw her walking up the steps, grocery bags in hand, sunglasses on like she was returning from a Saturday shopping trip. She froze when she saw me inside. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't just walk into someone's home." I set the mail down on the counter. "It's my home," I said. "You're living in a house you don't own." She smiled without blinking. "I'm afraid that's not true. We've been here for years. You can't just buy people's lives out from under them." That line hit me as strange. I asked her what she meant by years. She said she and her family had been maintaining the property while it was neglected, cleaning it, fixing things, and keeping the mountain community safe from outsiders. "Outsiders," she said, like I was invading a secret society. I laughed, trying to diffuse the tension. "There's no community up here. You're surrounded by 40 acres of forest." "Oh, there's a community," she said softly. "You just haven't met them yet." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Her husband appeared behind her then, a tall, quiet man with a beard, wearing a flannel shirt and giving me a look that wasn't exactly friendly. He stood there silently, just watching. I took a step back. "Look, I'm not here to fight. I just want you gone. I own this place legally, and if you don't leave, I'll have to call the sheriff." She sighed like I was being unreasonable. "You can call whoever you like. We're not leaving." Her husband placed the grocery bags down and crossed his arms. "My wife doesn't like strangers poking around," he said. His voice was low and steady, the kind that carried quiet authority. I looked at both of them and realized this wasn't going to be solved in a day. I muttered, "Fine, you'll hear from the county," and walked out. As I reached my truck, she called after me. "You'll regret this. The association doesn't take kindly to troublemakers." I turned back, half expecting her to laugh, but she didn't. She just smiled that same unnerving smile and went inside. That night I made a dozen calls. County records, local police, even the real estate office that handled the auction. Every single one confirmed the same thing. The house was legally mine, taxes paid, ownership transferred, clean title. No mention of any Fletcher family, no HOA, no mountain community. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't bluffing. There was something organized about her calm, the way she threw around that word, association. The next morning, I came back with a camera and started documenting everything. Photos of the house, the land, the mailbox, even the inside through the window. I wanted proof in case this turned into a legal battle. While I was taking pictures of the porch, I heard her voice behind me. You need permission to photograph community property. I spun around. She was standing at the top of the steps in that same pastel sweater, holding a clipboard this time. I almost laughed. Community property, I said. Lady, this isn't a suburb, it's the middle of nowhere. She scribbled something on her clipboard. I'll be reporting you for non-compliance. The board won't be happy. The board? I asked, almost amused. Yes, she said, serious as ever. The Mountain Ridge Homeowners Association. I stared at her. You just made that up. She smiled faintly. You'll see. Then she turned and went inside again. By now I was furious. I got in my truck, slammed the door, and drove straight to the county clerk's office in town. I showed them the deed, the ID, everything. They pulled up the property records, confirmed the address, and then hesitated. The clerk leaned forward and said, That house is under your name, yes, but it also has a recent caretaker registration filed by a Karen Fletcher. I blinked. A caretaker registration, what does that mean? The clerk shrugged. It means someone applied to maintain the property on behalf of the county before the sale went through, but those filings are supposed to be void once ownership transfers. Supposed to be, I repeated. She nodded slowly. You might want to check with the local sheriff. The Fletchers are well known up there. When I asked what she meant, the clerk just looked at me and said, They don't take kindly to outsiders. I didn't even wait a day before heading back up the mountain. If there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was someone acting like they owned what was mine. I told myself I'd start the renovation, show my ownership in action, and maybe that would finally convince them to leave. I loaded my truck with paint cans, lumber, and tools. The drive up felt different this time. The trees looked taller, the shadows longer, the silence heavier. When I reached the clearing, Karen's SUV was parked in the same spot. Smoke still rolled from the chimney. It was like she hadn't moved an inch since I left. I parked beside the driveway and got to work unpacking. I didn't even bother knocking this time. I set up my sawhorse, laid out my tools, and began measuring the rotted boards on the porch. Within minutes, I heard that door creak open. Karen stepped out, holding that same mug of coffee, her sweater perfectly clean, her expression perfectly annoyed. Excuse me, she said, but you can't just start construction without submitting a request. I stared at her incredulous. Submitting a what? A renovation request. It's standard for our community. Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, there is no community. There's just me, this house, and apparently you squatting in it. She blinked slowly. Squatting, that's an ugly word. We prefer residing. And as long as you're within Mountain Ridge boundaries, you're subject to our guidelines. I dropped my hammer. Lady, there are no boundaries. There's no Mountain Ridge HOA. You just made that up. She smiled. Then why do the neighbors follow the same rules? Neighbors, I said, laughing. There's no one within 5 miles of here. She didn't answer. She just took another sip of her coffee and walked back inside. I tried to ignore her. I really did. I replaced 2 steps, patched a hole, and sanded down the porch railing. But every hour or so, I'd catch her watching me through the window, not glaring, just observing like she was taking mental notes. At one point, her husband came outside. Big guy, quiet type. He didn't say a word, just stood near the porch, arms crossed, like he was making sure I didn't step out of line. When I finally asked if he had something to say, he just muttered, "We keep things neat around here," and went back inside. That's when I noticed something strange. My tape measure was gone. I had set it down beside the porch steps, but it had vanished. A minute later, I spotted it, hanging from a tree branch about 30 feet away. I walked over, retrieved it, and shook my head. Maybe it was the wind, I thought. Maybe I'd just misplaced it. But when I turned back, my hammer was missing too. By the time I packed up that afternoon, 3 of my tools were gone, and someone had written, "Please remove unauthorized materials," on a scrap of paper taped to my truck door. The next morning, I came prepared. Camera in hand, I filmed everything. The house, the yard, the porch, the missing tools. I figured if this turned into a legal mess, I'd have proof of harassment. Karen appeared again, this time wearing gardening gloves and trimming non-existent flowers beside the porch. Morning, she said cheerfully without looking up. Morning, I muttered, setting up my ladder. She gestured toward the paint cans. What color are you using? Does it matter? I asked. She nodded. We only allow neutral tones. Whites, grays, and soft greens. No bright colors, it disturbs the natural harmony. I laughed out loud. Natural harmony? You're standing on a porch with no railing and raccoons living under it. She didn't laugh. She just stared at me with those cold, unblinking eyes and said, You'll regret that choice. By midday, I had repainted half the porch a warm cedar brown, exactly the shade I wanted. I stepped back to admire it, and for the first time all day, I felt good. That feeling didn't last. I left for lunch in town, and when I came back, the entire painted section was covered in gray primer. My paint cans were open, half empty, and my brush was sitting in a bucket of water. I stood there stunned. Karen was out front again, smiling faintly as she pruned imaginary shrubs. I walked up to her. Did you repaint my porch? She didn't even blink. Your paint violated the community palette. The board voted to correct it. What board? I snapped. She tilted her head. You wouldn't know them yet. You haven't attended a meeting. I wanted to scream. You know what? I'm calling the sheriff again. Please do, she said. They know us well. That night I sat in my truck, engine idling, phone in my hand. I called the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty sighed when he heard my name. You're up near the Fletcher's place, right? Yeah, they're squatting in my house. He paused. They've had incidents before. Don't do anything that might escalate things. We'll send someone in the morning. I hung up, heart pounding. Incidents, that word stuck with me. When I drove back at dawn, I saw something new. A wooden sign nailed to one of the trees beside the driveway. It read, Mountain Ridge HOA, no unauthorized renovation or occupancy. Below it in small letters was another line, violators will be removed. And for the first time since I bought that house, I realized this wasn't just some weird couple playing house. Karen had built something up here, something organized and something dangerous. When I came back up the mountain the following week, I brought a locksmith with me. I was done playing nice. My cabin, my property, my rules. The locksmith pulled up in an old pickup, cheerful and clueless about what he was walking into. I told him we might run into some resistance. He chuckled, thinking I was joking. But as soon as his drill bit touched the deadbolt, the front door burst open. Out came Karen like a storm in a sundress. Her husband followed, holding a mug like he'd just stepped out of a Sunday cartoon. And behind them, the teenage son, still in pajama pants, glaring at me like I was the one breaking into their house. Karen raised her voice before I could even say a word. You're trespassing, she shouted. This is our home now, you can't just barge in here. The locksmith froze. You said this was your house, he muttered to me. It is, I said, calm but tight. I have the deed. Karen folded her arms. Oh, please, you're probably one of those flippers trying to take advantage of the housing crisis. My family has been maintaining this home for years. We've kept it from collapsing. You should be grateful. Grateful, I repeated, staring at the overgrown yard and the half-broken railing they duct-taped. Right. Her husband stepped in, trying to sound diplomatic. Look, we've got an understanding with the local HOA. They know we're here. We're caretakers, not squatters. That word hit me like a slap. HOA. I didn't even know there was an HOA up here. The mountain properties were supposed to be outside their jurisdiction. But when I asked for proof, Karen disappeared into the house and came back with a file folder, papers, letters, even an envelope stamped with a logo that read Mountain View Homeowners Association. The locksmith looked like he wanted to vanish. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave you folks to it, he said, backing away. I took the folder. The documents were impressive, fake signatures, letterheads, even a fake HOA president's contact number. It all looked official, but something felt off. The phone number was local, the dates didn't line up, and the bylaws were written like a fifth grader's essay. Karen stood tall as I flipped through it. See, we're registered, we even pay fees. Who do you pay them to? I asked. Me, she said flatly. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just squatting. She was running a scam. The HOA didn't exist. She invented it. She was collecting fees from other cabins, pretending to enforce made-up regulations, and apparently she'd even claimed my abandoned property as her family's home base. I took photos of everything and told her calmly that I'd be back, with law enforcement and the real paperwork. As I turned to leave, she shouted, "If you bring the cops here, you'll regret it." There was something in her voice, desperation mixed with pride, like she wasn't bluffing. That night, I stayed at a motel in town, scrolling through county property records and HOA listings. Sure enough, there was no Mountain View Homeowners Association. But I found something even more interesting. A complaint filed 2 years ago against a woman named Karen Whitmore for fraudulent HOA representation. She'd done this before. The next morning, I called the sheriff's department. They said they'd send a deputy to check things out, but they warned me not to take matters into my own hands. By the time we got back to the mountain, the cabin door was wide open again, but this time everything inside was gone. Furniture, tools, curtains, even the old cast-iron stove that had been bolted to the floor. Gone. Karen's car was gone too. I stepped inside, the silence almost mocking, but something on the table caught my eye, a letter, neatly folded with my name written in careful cursive. I opened it. "Since you like paperwork so much," it read, "here's some of your own. You'll find that the deed you hold isn't as clean as you think. This mountain has a way of keeping secrets, and so do I. Welcome home." No signature, just a faint smell of cigarette smoke and lavender. The deputy beside me whistled low. "Looks like she's got a flair for drama," he said. I didn't answer. I was staring at the corner of the floor where something small caught the light, a brass key lying half buried in the dust. It wasn't mine, and it didn't fit any lock, I knew. But I pocketed it anyway because deep down I knew Karen wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. And whatever she meant by "the deed isn't clean," I had a bad feeling I was about to find out. The deputy came back 2 days later with a property investigator. By then, I'd had time to board up the doors and windows, but honestly, I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the old wood sounded like Karen coming back. That letter she'd left, "The deed isn't as clean as you think," was eating at me. The investigator, an older man named Harlan, was one of those guys who'd seen it all. He carried a clipboard, wore a vest full of pens, and looked like he'd rather be fishing. After walking through the place, he said, "You got a weird one here. Most squatters don't leave cryptic notes, they just leave garbage." I handed him the key I found in the dust. "She left this behind," I said. He turned it in his hand, squinting. Not for any modern lock, maybe for a chest or a safe. You sure this place didn't have a basement or attic?" "I checked, it's just a crawl space and an attic full of cobwebs," I said. He gave me a look. "You check the crawl space yourself." I paused, "Not exactly." He smirked, "Then let's check it." So we did. I held a flashlight while Harlan crawled under the back deck and into the narrow, dirt-lined gap beneath the floorboards. He called out after a minute, "You're not gonna believe this." He pulled out a rusted metal box about the size of a small microwave with a corroded latch and an old padlock. I held up the brass key. It slid in perfectly. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt almost cinematic. Inside were stacks of papers, all old, yellowed property documents, letters, and a few black and white photos of the cabin in its prime. But one paper stood out, a deed transfer form. It had my grandfather's name on it and another signature below it, one that didn't match his handwriting. Someone had sold the cabin decades ago without the actual owner's consent. The fake transfer was later reversed, but the document was never properly cleared. The ownership chain was messy, legally gray. That's what Karen had meant by "the deed isn't clean." The sheriff whistled low when he saw it. She must have found this and figured she had a loophole, probably used it to convince herself, or others, that this was her house. "But why leave it?" I asked. "Why just vanish?" The sheriff shrugged. "Maybe she's regrouping, or maybe she's planning something worse." I didn't like the sound of that. The next morning, I went into town to grab breakfast at the diner, and that's when it got even stranger. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, poured my coffee and said, "You the one fixing up the old Whitmore cabin?" "Whitmore?" I asked, my stomach dropping. She nodded. "Yeah, Corinne's folks used to own that land years ago, back before the county redrew the lines. She grew up there. Always said it was still hers, even after her daddy lost it to taxes. Guess she couldn't let it go." So that was it. Corinne wasn't just a squatter. She was claiming what she thought was her family's home. I went back to the cabin that afternoon, feeling something close to pity. But the moment I opened the door, that pity turned into pure adrenaline. The place had been ransacked, again. Only this time, whoever did it had left something behind. On the dining table sat a small safe, not mine. It looked new, black steel, keypad lock, and taped to the top was a note. "Since you found the first box, you might as well open this one too." No signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I stared at it for a long time. Every instinct told me to call the sheriff. But another part of me, a more reckless, exhausted part, wanted to see what was inside. I tried the brass key, but it didn't fit, so I grabbed my crowbar and pried it open. The hinges snapped, and the door fell forward with a dull clang. Inside were photographs, recent ones, of me. Driving up the mountain, talking to the deputy, standing in front of the cabin, even one from the diner that morning. Someone had been following me. And at the bottom of the pile was a single envelope marked, "Next time, don't bring strangers to my mountain." That was when I noticed the faint smell again, cigarette smoke and lavender. Corinne hadn't vanished, she was watching. I stood there holding that envelope, realizing that this wasn't about property anymore. It was about revenge. And whatever she planned next, I had a sinking feeling it was going to make everything up to this point look tame. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. After finding those photos in the safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, somewhere out there in the tree line. I set up a chair by the front window, the one that faced the long gravel driveway curling down the mountain. The moonlight made everything silver, quiet, still. Too still. I loaded my old flashlight and placed it beside a thermos of coffee. I didn't have any weapons, just a crowbar, a hammer, and a baseball bat I found behind the shed. My plan was simple. If Corinne or anyone else tried to break in, I'd record everything, call the sheriff, and let the law handle it this time. Hours crawled by, midnight came and went. The forest made small noises, crickets, wind, the occasional creak of wood, but nothing more. Then, just after 2 in the morning, I heard it. A whistle. Not a tune, just one sharp note, somewhere out in the dark. Then silence. I turned off the lamp and held my breath. The whistle came again, softer this time, but closer. Then I saw a flicker of light, a flashlight beam sweeping low near the tree line. "Corinne," I whispered, half to myself, half to the shadows. No answer. I stepped outside slowly, the boards groaning beneath my feet. The air was cold, thick with that mountain smell of pine and rain-soaked dirt. I could see the faint glow of the flashlight now, moving between the trees. Whoever it was knew how to stay quiet. I took a few steps off the porch. "You're trespassing," I called. "This is private property." The light froze for a second, then blinked twice. That wasn't random, it was a signal. Before I could react, another light blinked from the opposite side of the clearing. Then a third one. My pulse spiked. There were 3 of them. I ran back inside, locked the door, and killed the lights. The only sound was the wind and my heart thudding in my ears. I grabbed my phone and dialed the sheriff. It went straight to voicemail. No signal. Figures, the mountains were notorious for dead zones. Then faintly I heard the back door rattle. Not hard, just enough to test if it was locked. Then came a whisper through the wood. "You shouldn't have opened it." Corinne's voice, calm, low, deliberate. My throat went dry. "What do you want?" I shouted. No response, just the creak of footsteps retreating into the dark. When morning finally came, the forest looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But outside, near the shed, I found something stuck in the dirt. A cigarette butt, lavender-scented. That was her calling card. The sheriff showed up later that day after I finally got through on the radio. He didn't look amused. "You're telling me 3 people were sneaking around your cabin at 2 a.m., and one of them was a woman who thinks she owns the place." "That's exactly what I'm saying," I told him. "And she said something. She said I shouldn't have opened it. I think she meant the safe." He scratched his chin. "We didn't find any prints on that safe, by the way. You sure she didn't leave that as a scare tactic?" "Maybe," I said, "but she's got people helping her. I saw at least 3 lights last night." He nodded slowly. "You might be right. Karen's family used to run a local neighborhood watch, basically a glorified group of busybodies. Maybe some of them still think she's in charge." That made sense in a twisted way. She wasn't just acting alone. She had loyal neighbors who saw her as the mountain's protector. After the sheriff left, I walked the perimeter of the property. Near the edge of the woods, I found footprints, 3 sets, one smaller than the others. They led to a small clearing behind a fallen pine. That's when I noticed something strange, a rusty sign half buried in the dirt. I brushed it off and froze. It read, "Mountain View Homeowners Association, private property." It was old, faded, and real, not one of her fake props. That's when the realization hit me. The HOA she kept talking about, it had existed once. Maybe not in the county records anymore, but at some point it was real. And if Karen had paperwork from it, she might have found something that technically gave her leverage. That night I packed my bags. I was ready to leave, to walk away from this haunted mountain, this madness. But as I started the truck, my headlights caught something nailed to a tree at the end of the drive. A photo of me sleeping in the chair by the window. Scrawled beneath it in red marker were 4 words that made my blood run cold. "Next time, stay awake." I didn't start the truck. I just sat there, staring into the woods, realizing I wasn't dealing with a scammer anymore. I was dealing with someone who thought she was defending her land, no matter who had to pay for it. By sunrise, I was running on caffeine and nerves. The sheriff said he'd look into it, but I could tell he didn't believe half of what I told him. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. If I hadn't seen that photo with my own eyes, I'd have thought I was losing it too. Still, something about that old HOA sign stuck in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a relic. So I drove into town and visited the county records office again. The clerk, a thin guy with glasses and a coffee stain on his shirt, groaned when he saw me coming. "You're back," he said. "Let me guess, more property drama." "Something like that," I said. "I need to see if a Mountain View Homeowners Association ever actually existed." He sighed but started typing. After a few minutes, he frowned. "Huh, that's odd. It did exist. Incorporated back in 1982, dissolved officially in 2001. But," he scrolled more. "One parcel, the one your cabin sits on, was never properly removed from its jurisdiction. It's still technically under protective community covenant status." I leaned forward. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," he said, "if someone claimed authority over it and nobody challenged it in court, they could enforce rules on it. At least on paper." My stomach sank. Karen hadn't made it up. She'd just taken advantage of a loophole that everyone else forgot about. I asked for copies, paid the fees, and drove straight back up the mountain. I didn't know what I was planning. Maybe I thought confronting her with the truth would make her stop. Maybe I just needed closure. When I pulled up, my heart nearly stopped. The cabin door was wide open again. But this time there was smoke curling out of the chimney. Someone was inside. I stepped out of the truck slowly. "Karen," I shouted, "we need to talk." No answer. I moved closer, the boards creaking beneath my boots. Inside, everything looked almost tidy. A pot simmered on the stove. A blanket folded neatly on the couch. It was eerie, like someone had been living there comfortably for weeks. Then I heard the floorboards groan behind me. "Still think it's your house?" I turned around. Karen stood in the doorway wearing a dark jacket and gloves. Her expression wasn't angry, it was sad. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "Karen, this isn't about the house anymore," I told her. "I know about the old HOA. I know your family used to live here, but it's over. You lost it years ago." She smiled faintly, Lost it. You don't lose something that's in your blood. Before I could respond, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded map. It looked old and water-stained. My father hid the original charter, she said softly. The one that proves Mountain View still exists. You want your deed clean, you'll need to find it first. She tossed the map at my feet. It's not here, it's where it all started, the cave behind the ridge. Then she turned and walked out before I could stop her. I picked up the map, heart racing. The ridge was a mile hike uphill through dense forest. If there was any chance this charter existed, I had to see it myself. By mid-afternoon, I reached the ridge. The cave was barely visible, hidden by ferns and moss. I ducked inside, using my phone flashlight to see. The air was cool and damp, the ground uneven. And then at the very back, I saw something, an old wooden chest covered in dust and cobwebs. I pried it open. Inside were binders of documents stamped with the HOA's old seal. Meeting notes, member lists, financial ledgers. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope marked Property Covenants, Private. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a legal declaration, signed by multiple homeowners, including one name I recognized, Karen Whitmore, minor, by proxy of her father, Charles Whitmore. It was a founding document. Her father really had helped create the HOA. As I stood there processing it all, I heard footsteps outside the cave. Slow, deliberate. "Find what you were looking for?" Karen's voice echoed. I turned, holding up the papers. "You were right, your dad started it, but that doesn't give you ownership now." She stepped into the beam of my flashlight, her eyes glinting. "Maybe not legally," she said, "but morally, spiritually, this mountain remembers its own." "Then why the threats? Why the games?" I demanded. "If you wanted your father's legacy respected, you could have told me the truth." Her expression softened for a second, then hardened again. "Because people like you don't listen until they're scared." Lightning cracked somewhere in the distance, thunder rolling through the valley. I realized then she didn't plan to let me leave quietly. I took a cautious step backward. "Karen, this has to stop. The sheriff's involved now. If you keep this up, you're the one who'll lose everything." She tilted her head, eyes cold. "I already did." And before I could react, she blew out the lantern she'd brought, plunging us both into darkness. The second that lantern went out, the cave swallowed me in total blackness. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, couldn't hear anything but my pulse hammering in my ears. I called her name once, no answer. Then, faintly, her footsteps echoed deeper into the tunnel. I flicked on my phone flashlight, but the battery warning flashed red. Figures. I stumbled after her, careful not to trip on the uneven ground. "Karen!" I shouted. "It doesn't have to end like this." Her voice came back, faint and distant. "It already has." A flicker of orange light appeared ahead, firelight. When I reached the end of the tunnel, she was kneeling beside a metal drum, tossing papers into the flames. Old HOA documents, property ledgers, everything that proved her family had once been part of this mountain story. "You don't understand," she said, not looking at me. "If I can't have it, no one will." "Karen, stop." I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. She yanked free, eyes wild. "You think this mountain, about money and deeds, it's about belonging. My father built these trails, laid that foundation, planted those pines. We kept this place alive long before you people bought it up as vacation homes." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw the pain behind her madness. She wasn't just clinging to land, she was clinging to identity. "Then let's do it right," I said quietly. "Don't burn it, let me help you tell your father's story the right way." She hesitated, the flames crackling between us. For a moment I thought she might listen, but then the fire flared, catching on the dry paper faster than she expected. Smoke filled the chamber, thick and choking. "Karen, we have to get out of here," I coughed, grabbing her arm again. This time she didn't resist. Together we stumbled back through the tunnel, half-blind, lungs burning. Behind us, the old chest collapsed into embers. By the time we reached the cave's entrance, the smoke was pouring out like a beast escaping its cage. Outside, rain had started to fall, a thin, steady drizzle that hissed as it hit the warm rock. Corinne dropped to her knees, coughing hard. I crouched beside her, trying to catch my breath. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. "You shouldn't have come here," she said weakly. "This place, it takes from everyone who tries to own it." Before I could respond, blue and red lights flickered through the trees. The sheriff's truck. He must have tracked my car up the ridge road. When he saw us, soaked and covered in soot, he shook his head. "Well, looks like I missed one heck of a campfire story." Corinne didn't say a word as they put her in the back of the cruiser. She just stared out the window, that same mix of sadness and defiance on her face. At the station, the sheriff filled out the paperwork while I gave my statement. Turns out she had a long record, trespassing, fraud, even attempted arson from years back. But they also found something else in her car, a folder of photographs and notes. Detailed maps, property surveys, and handwritten letters addressed to her father. In one of them she wrote, "I tried to keep the mountain alive, Dad, but they've all forgotten you." Something about that line stayed with me. A month later, I finally finished repairing the cabin. The roof stopped leaking, the porch was solid again, and the view from the deck was clear all the way down to the valley. I hung one of the old black and white photos of the original HOA meeting on the wall, a reminder of what came before me. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I heard footsteps on the gravel. My stomach tightened until I saw who it was, the sheriff. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Found this in evidence, figured you want it." Inside was a deed, freshly certified by the county, clearing the old HOA covenant once and for all. The cabin was officially mine. No loopholes, no ghosts in the paperwork. But behind the deed was something else. A small Polaroid photo, taken years ago. It showed a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, standing in front of the same cabin, smiling proudly. On the back, in fatting pen, were the words, "Corinne, 1989. I sat on the porch long after the sheriff left, staring at that photo. Somewhere between anger and pity, I realized she hadn't been my enemy. Not really. She was just someone who couldn't let go of the only home she'd ever known. When I finally stood to go inside, I noticed something on the porch railing. A small lavender-scented cigarette, unlit, resting neatly by the post. I looked out into the dark woods, the wind whispering through the trees. Maybe it was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe, just maybe, this mountain still remembered its own. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.